The palace security control room was almost empty when Royal Guard Marcus Hale noticed the evidence archive monitor flicker for a moment. The system normally stored footage without interruption, but one clip from the children's corridor had just been marked auto-deleted. That status should never appear in the protected archive. Hale opened the file before the timer finished. The recording showed Princess Charlotte outside her study earlier that evening, and someone standing beside the corridor console. The archive alert appeared on the evidence terminal at the exact moment Royal Guard Marcus Hale finished reviewing routine security logs for the Palace Protection Unit. The Palace Security Control Room was quiet at that hour, with most of the monitoring stations operating automatically, while the night shift supervised system activity across the building. Hale's attention moved toward the evidence archive display when a brief notification flashed across the terminal. The alert indicated that a newly uploaded corridor recording from the children's wing had been marked for automatic deletion. That classification immediately caught his attention. Footage from that section of the palace was rarely removed from the protected archive without direct authorization from senior command staff. Hale leaned closer to the monitor and opened the system log attached to the notification. The removal timer displayed only a few seconds remaining before the file would disappear permanently from the database. Without hesitation, he opened the recording before the archive process could complete. The video feed appeared on the screen, displaying the corridor outside Princess Charlotte's private study earlier that evening. The hallway lights reflected softly along the polished floor, while the fixed camera above the opposite wall captured the area surrounding the study entrance. The recording began with Charlotte stepping briefly outside the study doorway, her small figure visible in the frame as she paused near the doorway as if she had noticed something across the corridor. Mounted on the opposite wall was the digital supervision console used by palace security officers to review monitoring permissions assigned to rooms in that section of the building. Standing beside the console was an unidentified adult dressed in dark civilian clothing rather than palace staff uniform. The person's face remained partially turned away from the camera as they raised a tablet device and connected it to the interface port beneath the console screen. The system responded immediately, its display illuminating as the system opened a supervision control panel associated with Charlotte's study and the corridor sensors positioned nearby. Hale leaned forward as the recording continued, watching carefully while the tablet cursor moved across the panel. The individual navigated through the interface fields with confident speed, clearly familiar with the structure of the palace security system. Hale continued watching the recording as the unidentified individual worked at the corridor console. The tablet remained connected to the interface port, while the console display showed the supervision control panel assigned to Charlotte's study and the corridor sensors positioned nearby. The person moved quickly through the system menu, navigating across the panel fields with deliberate accuracy, as if they had used the interface many times before. Hale replayed that portion of the clip more slowly, studying the movement of the tablet cursor as it approached the section of the panel responsible for supervision permissions linked to Charlotte's room. At that same moment, Charlotte herself appeared again in the frame, stepping slightly closer to the study doorway while looking across the corridor toward the illuminated console. The light from the screen reflected faintly against the wall, while the unidentified individual continued working on the interface. Charlotte seemed curious about the activity and moved nearer to the door window, watching the console screen from inside the study entrance. The moment she approached the doorway glass, the individual disconnected the tablet quickly and stepped away from the console. Within seconds, the person left the corridor entirely, disappearing beyond the camera's field of view before Charlotte opened the door again. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, yet the implications were serious. Hale paused the recording and examined the system log attached to the clip. That was when he noticed the alert responsible for triggering the archive notification. Only 10 seconds after the footage finished uploading to the evidence server, an authenticated deletion command had been transmitted to the archive database. The command was scheduled to remove the recording permanently before it could be reviewed by security staff. Hale reacted immediately. He copied the footage into a protected evidence folder and locked the file under restricted access before the deletion cycle could complete. The archive network accepted removal commands only from devices carrying verified internal credentials, meaning the instruction had not been issued by random system malfunction. Someone connected to the palace infrastructure had deliberately attempted to erase the recording almost as soon as it existed. Hale opened the extended system log and reviewed the timeline attached to the command. The request had been transmitted seconds after the recording finished uploading, suggesting the person responsible knew exactly which camera clip they needed to remove. Hale secured the preserved copy of the footage and attached the archive log to a report addressed to the palace command desk. The clip itself showed only a brief corridor interaction, but its significance was clear. An unidentified individual had accessed the supervision console controlling Charlotte's study, and someone inside the palace network had immediately attempted to erase the only recording that showed it. Prince William arrived at the palace security wing less than 30 minutes after Marcus Hale transmitted the preserved corridor footage to the command desk. By the time the prince reached the evidence control area, the review room had already been placed under restricted access while technicians verified the deletion command attached to the archive server. The atmosphere inside the security wing remained calm but noticeably tense as analysts monitored system logs across multiple screens displaying network activity throughout the palace. Hale stood beside the evidence terminal when William entered the room, accompanied by the senior duty officer responsible for overseeing the palace protection network. The prince acknowledged the officers briefly before directing his attention toward the terminal displaying the recovered footage. Hale summarized the situation clearly and without exaggeration, explaining that a corridor camera outside Princess Charlotte's private study had captured an unidentified individual connecting a tablet device to the supervision console mounted on the wall opposite the study door. The guard also explained that the archive system had received an authenticated deletion command only seconds after the recording had finished uploading to the evidence database. Hale then activated the footage on the review terminal so the prince could see the sequence himself. The recording began playing across the large monitor mounted above the terminal. Charlotte appeared first, stepping briefly outside her study door before pausing near the doorway as if she had noticed movement across the corridor. Opposite the study entrance stood the wall-mounted console used by palace security officers to review monitoring permissions assigned to rooms in that section of the building. Beside the console stood the unidentified individual dressed in dark civilian clothing rather than palace staff uniform. The person raised a tablet device and connected it to the interface port beneath the console display. The console screen illuminated immediately as the supervision control interface associated with Charlotte's study appeared on the panel. William leaned slightly closer to the monitor while the tablet cursor moved across the console interface. The individual navigated through the system fields with deliberate speed, clearly familiar with the layout of the palace monitoring network. Charlotte stepped slightly closer to the study doorway, watching the illuminated console from inside the corridor entrance. The moment she approached the door window, the individual disconnected the tablet and moved away from the console before leaving the corridor entirely. Hale paused the recording on the frame where the supervision control panel remained visible on the console display. The interface showed the monitoring permissions assigned to Charlotte's study door and the corridor sensors positioned outside the room. The archive server received a deletion request 10 seconds after this recording finished uploading, Hale explained calmly while pointing to the system timeline displayed on the terminal. If the command had processed normally, the clip would have disappeared from the evidence database before anyone inside the security unit could review it. William remained silent for several moments while studying the frozen frame on the screen. The significance of the footage was immediately clear. The unidentified individual had not simply approached the console by accident. The tablet connection and the speed with which the system interface had been opened suggested preparation and familiarity with the Palace monitoring network. Even more concerning was the deletion command that followed the recording almost instantly. The prince leaned slightly closer to the screen, examining the interface controls visible behind the tablet cursor. Those controls determined how the security system classified activity around Charlotte's study and the surrounding corridor sensors. Any modification to those settings could temporarily influence how the monitoring network responded to movement in that section of the building. William folded his arms as the clip replayed once more. When the recording ended again, the room fell silent. For several seconds he remained staring at the screen before stepping back from the terminal abruptly. The evidence chair beside the desk scraped sharply across the floor as he pushed it aside with sudden force. The sound echoed across the otherwise quiet review room, drawing the attention of several technicians working nearby. William turned toward the rows of archive terminals lining the walls of the evidence room. "Disconnect the archive system from the network," he ordered firmly. "Every terminal in this room, now." The command triggered immediate movement among the technicians as they began isolating the evidence servers from the Palace network. William then turned toward the duty officer monitoring the security logs. "Begin tracking every maintenance device that connected to the Palace infrastructure within the last hour," he continued. "If that tablet issued the deletion command, it will exist somewhere in the system logs." The investigation widened instantly as analysts began isolating network activity records across the internal security grid. The recovered footage had revealed something far more serious than a simple archive irregularity. Someone inside the palace had attempted to manipulate the supervision system protecting Princess Charlotte's study, and then erase the only recording that showed it. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the review room and into the palace cybersecurity control desk, where technicians monitored the internal infrastructure network that supported the security systems throughout the building. Large display screens illuminated the room as analysts began isolating the digital trail connected to the deletion command that had targeted the corridor recording outside Princess Charlotte's study. Every device authorized to interact with the Palace network carried a unique digital signature linked to a specific department, allowing investigators to identify which terminal or tablet had transmitted commands through the infrastructure servers. The deletion request attached to the recovered clip initially appeared to originate from a maintenance-level diagnostic tablet, commonly used by Palace engineers to test system components such as door sensors, camera arrays, and monitoring consoles. That classification explained why the command had not triggered an immediate alarm when it reached the archive server. The security system recognized the credentials as valid and processed the request automatically. However, when analysts cross-checked the device identification number against the registry of maintenance tablets assigned to Palace engineers currently on duty, the result created immediate concern. The identification code embedded within the command did not correspond to any device listed in the active equipment inventory. Marcus Hale watched from the side of the room as technicians expanded the trace window across the network. The timeline revealed that the tablet responsible for issuing the deletion command had connected to the Palace infrastructure network only briefly before transmitting the request. The connection session lasted less than 40 seconds before the device disconnected again. During that short window, the tablet transmitted only a single command, the deletion request aimed directly at the archive evidence containing the corridor footage. Analysts reviewed the authentication handshake associated with the connection and confirmed that the device had successfully passed the Palace verification protocols. That meant whoever operated the tablet possessed access credentials capable of interacting with the internal security network. The system logs then revealed another important detail. The device had connected through one of the wireless infrastructure nodes located inside the Palace service corridors used by maintenance staff and security technicians moving between internal control rooms. Technicians continued expanding the network trace while Marcus Hale observed the activity from the cybersecurity desk. Each wireless node inside the Palace corresponded to a physical relay point embedded within the infrastructure grid supporting the building's internal communications system. By analyzing the signal handshake associated with the tablet's connection, analysts were able to narrow the origin of the signal to a small group of nodes positioned along a service corridor that ran behind several administrative offices and security control rooms. That discovery suggested that the person seen in the corridor recording had likely remained somewhere within that same internal passage network when they issued the deletion command. Hale leaned forward as the technicians isolated the signal path further. The system logs showed the tablet connecting to the infrastructure node only seconds after the corridor camera finished uploading the footage to the archive server. That timing strongly suggested the individual had been monitoring the system activity and knew exactly when the recording would appear in the database. As soon as the clip was stored, the tablet connected to the network and transmitted the deletion command in an attempt to remove it before security personnel could review the footage. The precision of the sequence indicated familiarity not only with the Palace layout, but also with the behavior of the security infrastructure itself. Prince William remained inside the evidence wing while technicians relayed updates from the cybersecurity desk. Guards quietly repositioned along the corridors surrounding the security offices, ensuring that movement through the area remained restricted while the investigation progressed. Hale studied the connection report as analysts continued examining the device signature for signs of cloning or stolen credentials. One technician highlighted an additional anomaly within the authentication sequence. Although the tablet carried maintenance-level authorization keys, the device itself had not performed any diagnostic checks or maintenance operations during its brief connection window. Its only action had been the deletion command, aimed directly at the archive server. That detail reinforced the conclusion that the connection had been planned specifically to remove the corridor recording. By the time the technicians finished compiling the trace report, two critical facts had become clear. The unidentified individual seen accessing the supervision console outside Charlotte's study had been physically inside the Palace when the incident occurred, and the tablet used to erase the recording had connected to the internal network from within the building itself. The investigation had now moved beyond a simple system irregularity and into the possibility of a deliberate internal security breach. While the cybersecurity team continued tracing the tablet's connection through the Palace infrastructure network, Marcus Hale returned to the evidence terminal inside the security wing to review the recovered corridor recording once more. The earlier analysis had already confirmed that someone had attempted to erase the clip almost immediately after it was uploaded, but Hale wanted to examine the footage more closely now that the significance of the console access had become clearer. He reopened the file and slowed the playback speed so each movement within the corridor could be observed in greater detail. The camera angle, mounted high along the opposite wall, provided a clear view of the supervision console outside Princess Charlotte's study, as well as the doorway where Charlotte briefly appeared during the sequence. Hale allowed the recording to play until the moment the unidentified individual connected the tablet to the console interface. The console screen illuminated immediately as the supervision control panel appeared across the display. Hale paused the frame and enlarged the image on the monitor, focusing on the interface fields visible behind the tablet device. Several control options appeared across the panel, including settings that allowed security officers to adjust how the monitoring network interpreted movement near specific rooms. Those options were rarely modified except during controlled maintenance procedures supervised by senior technicians. Hale advanced the recording one frame at a time while studying the tablet cursor moving across the screen. The cursor passed over several interface fields before stopping near the section responsible for supervision permissions assigned to Charlotte's study door. At first, the movement appeared subtle, but when Hale magnified the frame further, it became clear that the tablet operator had navigated directly to that control field rather than opening the panel for a routine system check. At that same moment, Charlotte appeared again in the recording, stepping slightly closer to the study doorway while looking toward the illuminated console across the corridor. The glow of the console screen reflected faintly along the hallway wall while the individual continued operating the tablet connected to the panel. Hale captured a still image from the frame where the tablet cursor hovered over the supervision field associated with Charlotte's study and transmitted the image to the cybersecurity desk for confirmation. Within minutes, one of the analysts contacted the evidence room to verify what Hale had observed. The highlighted control field visible on the console screen corresponded to the monitoring classification assigned to Charlotte's study door. That particular setting allowed administrators to temporarily adjust how the palace monitoring system interpreted activity around a specific room. Under normal conditions, the study remained under continuous supervision, meaning any movement near the door triggered alerts within the security network. However, the interface also contained a controlled maintenance option that allowed authorized technicians to place a room under temporary unsupervised status during system calibration or equipment testing. If that status change had been activated for Charlotte's study, the monitoring network would briefly classify the room as inactive even though corridor sensors remained operational. Such a change would create a narrow window during which movement near the study door might not immediately trigger the alert system monitored by the palace command desk. Hale replayed the footage again while listening to the analyst confirm the significance of the interface control visible on the console display. The unidentified individual had navigated directly to that field before Charlotte approached the doorway and interrupted the process. The command sequence had not been completed in the recording because the tablet was disconnected the moment Charlotte stepped closer to the door window. Hale realized that if Charlotte had remained inside the room only a few seconds longer, the operator might have successfully altered the monitoring status before leaving the corridor. That discovery changed the meaning of the entire clip. The person standing beside the console had not been conducting a routine system check. They had attempted to manipulate the supervision settings protecting Princess Charlotte's study itself. Hale forwarded the still image and playback timeline to the command desk so the information could be added to the growing investigation report. By the time the technicians finished reviewing the frame sequence, the evidence revealed a clear conclusion. The unidentified individual seen in the corridor had attempted to alter the digital supervision status assigned to Charlotte's room and had then tried to erase the only camera recording that showed the attempt taking place. The investigation had now uncovered not only unauthorized access to a palace security console, but the beginning of a deliberate effort to manipulate the monitoring system protecting a royal child. The confirmation that someone had attempted to alter the monitoring status protecting Princess Charlotte's study changed the tone of the investigation immediately. When Marcus Hale forwarded the captured frame showing the targeted supervision control field, Prince William issued a new set of instructions from inside the security wing. His voice carried across the evidence room as technicians continued analyzing network logs and archive activity reports. "I want the entire evidence archive isolated," he said firmly. "Disconnect every terminal connected to that server until we know exactly how that deletion command was issued." The order triggered immediate movement across the security wing. Technicians began shutting down network connections, while security officers secured the archive terminals lining the walls of the evidence room. Portable diagnostic scanners were brought in to examine each system connected to the archive infrastructure. Within minutes, the quiet evidence room transformed into a controlled but intense scene of activity as technicians disconnected cables, isolated data drives, and reviewed system authentication logs. The phrase "destroying the evidence room," later used by several officers, referred not to physical damage but to the scale of the forensic inspection now underway. Storage racks containing archive servers were opened so investigators could verify that no external device had been connected to the system hardware. Analysts began reviewing the full sequence of camera recordings from corridors surrounding the children's wing during the time window when the incident occurred. Marcus Hale remained beside the central evidence terminal while technicians copied the recovered corridor clip into multiple protected storage partitions to ensure that the file could not be targeted again by unauthorized deletion commands. Prince William stood near the center of the room observing the operation while investigators reported their findings. The prince understood how narrowly the footage had avoided disappearing entirely. If Hale had not opened the clip when the archive alert appeared, the deletion command would have completed within seconds, removing the only visual record of the console access outside Charlotte's. The attempt to erase the footage had been precise, suggesting the person responsible knew exactly which recording contained the evidence they wanted removed. That realization made the preservation of the clip even more significant. The recovered footage had become the single most important piece of evidence in determining what had happened in the corridor outside Charlotte's study earlier that evening. As the archive inspection continued, analysts began reviewing adjacent corridor recordings stored within the evidence system to determine whether any additional files had been altered or removed during the same time period. The process required comparing each stored video segment against the system logs, documenting when the recordings were uploaded and accessed. One technician confirmed that every other clip from nearby cameras remained intact, which meant the deletion command had targeted only the recording showing the console access outside Charlotte's. That detail reinforced the conclusion that the action had been deliberate rather than accidental. Someone had known exactly which piece of footage contained the relevant evidence and had attempted to remove it before the security unit reviewed the archive. Meanwhile, the cybersecurity desk continued analyzing the network activity associated with the tablet device that had issued the deletion command. Their report confirmed that the device had transmitted only one instruction during its brief connection to the palace infrastructure network, the removal request aimed directly at the evidence archive. It had not accessed additional camera feeds or attempted to modify other system records. The operator had connected to the network for one specific purpose: erase the corridor clip that showed the console access near Charlotte's study. Marcus Hale listened as the technician summarized the findings while the archive inspection gradually reached its conclusion. The recovered clip remained locked within a restricted evidence partition, protected from further deletion commands while investigators continued examining the network trace. Prince William looked once more at the recording displayed on the terminal, the frame frozen on the moment the unidentified individual connected the tablet to the console outside Charlotte's. Without that recording, one analyst quietly remarked, we would never have known the console had been accessed. William nodded slightly before turning toward the security officers overseeing the investigation. The recovered footage had exposed an attempt to manipulate the supervision system protecting Princess Charlotte and then erase the evidence of that attempt from the palace archive. Because Marcus Hale had secured the clip seconds before the deletion command completed, the recording now remained preserved inside the palace evidence database. The investigation would continue, but one fact was already clear to everyone inside the security wing. Someone inside the palace had tried to hide what happened in the corridor outside Charlotte's, and the only reason the truth still existed was because a royal guard noticed the archive alert just in time.